Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event. We'll begin in a minute.
You'll be able to share my screen for me, I take it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I won't be able to. Okay, welcome everyone to Actera's first lecture for our spring 2021 lecture series. This lecture is entitled Mass Beneficial Electrification, the Challenge Ahead. This is a four-part series that delves into cross-sectoral climate solutions already underway in local to global settings. We'll learn from influential leaders who are taking action at many levels to combat climate change, whether via social change, corporate operations, or financial markets. My name is Robbie Brown. I'm your host for this evening, and I'm also the Community Engagement Associate for Actera. Before we begin, this is a Zoom webinar, and the chat box is disabled. However, there is a Q&A portion towards the latter half of this event. If you have a question for our keynote speaker this evening, please submit your question by using the Q&A tab that's built into Zoom, and we'll try our best to get to your question. If you're unfamiliar with Actera, we're an environmental nonprofit based in the Bay Area. And to be more specific, we are located within Palo Alto. We're driven by environmental problems occurring locally and globally, and primarily the problems that have resulted due to climate change. We like to engage with our local communities, companies, and agencies in the Bay Area with a focus on Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. We have a wide variety of programming under the categories of electrification, food sustainability, workplace sustainability, and education. Our public lecture series is part of our educational programming. And our aim is to present a diverse range of views to help advance conversations and to allow deeper reflections on challenging issues. We'd like to thank our series underwriters for their support, Mary and Clinton Gilliland and Armand and Elion Nukermans, as well as our sponsors, the Bay Area Quality Management District and the Foster in Palo Alto. We also have some exciting news. Our team is expanding. We are hiring a Carl Knapp Go EV Senior Manager. If this position or opportunity interests you, you can learn more about the job position on our website, as well as information in terms of how to apply. We have a lot of events coming up this month and the next, so I'm going to try to go through these slides quickly so we can get to Bruce's presentation. The next one is February 24th at 11 a.m., which is a virtual coffee hour with Actera's Executive Director. Join her for a conversation about intersection of technology, sustainability, innovation, and social justice. And then on February 24th at 7 p.m., we have an EV Financial Incentives Clinic. If you think you can't afford an EV, think again. Learn about the many financial assistance programs that can make vehicle ownership a reality for you and your family. On March 4th at 12 p.m., we have a Go EV workshop. At these workshops, we cover information about the basics of EV ownership, such as the benefits of owning an EV, rebates, battery range, charging, and so much more. March 9th at 2 p.m., we have a heat pump water heater steps to electrifying the home event. Learn about different barriers, permits, and rebates to install your heat pump water heater. We have an ongoing cooking series for the month of March every Thursday at 6:30 p.m., where you can cook alongside Chef Kelvin in your kitchen every week for this virtual induction cooking series. And then most likely our biggest event of this year is going to be Promise to Our Planet. This is a virtual benefit and celebration, as well as an award ceremony. We will be celebrating our work and all of you in our community. This event will include award winners, guest speakers, a plant-based induction cook-talk demonstration, dancing, music, and more. That is March 26th at 5 p.m. Okay, great. So I'm going to hand it off to Bruce Hodge, who is our keynote speaker for this evening. Bruce is an environmental activist, computer scientist, a fine art photographer, and Actera board member. has quite a bit of history in Palo Alto. He founded carbon-free Palo Alto in 2011, played a crucial role in convincing the city of Palo Alto to provide carbon-neutral electricity to all customers. Since then, he's worked to keep Palo Alto in the vanguard of cities striving to implement a low-carbon energy future by focusing on strategies such as community solar and environmentally beneficial electrification. All right, Bruce, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours. And please feel free to get started once you're ready.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for the introduction, and let's just hop right in. My talk is about mass beneficial electrification. You may be wondering what that is. Hopefully I'll answer that as we get into the presentation. So I'm going to explore in this talk the aspects of a national mass electrification project, which would include the required timeline, scale, and technology, and then talk about some of the policy changes and financial mechanisms that can be used for doing that. And the Bay Area is also home to several groundbreaking initiatives in this arena. And what are they, and how can your individual actions contribute to solving the climate crisis? So I have some good news. Political will is the only obstacle to solving climate change. There are no technological breakthroughs needed. However, I have some bad news. Political will is the only obstacle to solving climate change. So what is the goal? The goal that we have before us is stabilizing the climate at an acceptable level. But what is an acceptable level? Well, the Paris Climate Accords aim to hit a 2 degrees C rise above pre-industrial levels, and they also were shooting for 1.5 degrees C if possible as an aspirational goal. And the IPCC said that, quote, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees C would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. Amen. So where are we now? We're currently around 1.2 degrees C above pre-industrial levels, pretty close to 1.5. September 2020 was the hottest month ever globally. 2020 was the second hottest year ever, just behind 2016. And we continue to add committed emissions, i.e. we're building coal and natural gas plants, putting new fossil fuel vehicles into the mix, et cetera, et cetera. A recent UN report came out saying that the top fossil fuel countries aren't setting the right goal. They're planning on increasing their fossil fuel production. The red line in the graph shows where what their plans are versus where we need to be down below. So clearly there's a misunderstanding of what direction we need to be moving in. And of course we have COVID and the much larger recession and climate change, which is much larger than all of those. We'll deal with COVID, we'll deal with the recession. Climate change is going to be a huge challenge. So do we have a 1.5 degree C future? So this, we're currently at more than 400 gigatons per year in emissions. And this chart is showing the historic emissions starting from 1980. And so you can see that we've peaked at over 40. We've grown fairly rapidly in the past 30 years. And in order for us to stay under this 1.5 degree C future, we need to meet what's called a carbon budget. This graph is showing that the remaining carbon budget is 420 gigatons of carbon, which means that if we keep emitting at the current rate, we would use up the entire budget in 8 years. And unfortunately, since then, there's new analysis that's been done that indicates that the budget is not really 420, it's really 235. So that means that we're facing an even greater cliff in order to stay under the 1.5 degrees C guardrail. And this is assuming no use of negative emissions technologies or NET, which I will get into in a minute. So because of this cliff that we're sitting at, it's extremely unlikely that 1.5 degrees C is attainable in the near future. Now, maybe we can get there eventually through removal of CO2 from the atmosphere through nets. That remains to be seen. A 2 degrees C future is a little better. This curve is not quite as steep. The graph is showing 1170 gigatons. Again, the new analysis is showing that we have 985 gigatons budget. So using the 1170 number anyway, that's a 6% reduction per year starting in 2020. And of course, we didn't start last year, so we're already 1 year behind. If we'd only done this starting back in 2000, we could have done it in 2% per year. This is all for a 66 greater than 2/3 chance of staying below the 2 degrees C guardrail. So we should, it seems like we still have a shot at a 2 degrees C, but we should, of course, be as aggressive as possible and shoot for an outcome closer to 1.5 degree C. These nets, negative emissions technologies, range from low tech, such as planting more trees, to more high tech options such as developing machines to scrub CO2 from the air. Unfortunately, they're all sort of mostly theoretical at this point, with some demonstration projects. The European Academy's Science Advisory Council says that, quote, negative emission technologies may have a useful role to play, but on the basis of current information, not at the levels required to compensate for inadequate mitigation measures. So just very quickly, these different kinds of technologies, coastal blue carbon that's growing more vegetation at the in water environments along the coast. Accelerated chemical weathering of rocks is actually involved spreading ground rock on agricultural fields. Direct CO2, direct air capture, this is massive banks of fans, literally pulling air through filtration and then taking the CO2 and sequestering it in geologic formations, or by using a chemical process with basalt. There's also this biomass energy with a carbon capture and storage. Again, you burn biomass, but then you store it in geologic formation. There's also afforestation, which is planting new trees in areas that didn't have trees, and reforestation is replanting trees in existing areas. And there's biochar. Anyway, all these things need to be applied at huge scales, and there's a lot of questions about. I mean, none of these are really ready for prime time right now, and we really are at a juncture where we really need these steep reductions, as I showed you before with the graphs. So 78% of global emissions are related to energy. and agriculture is the next closest thing at 13%, and followed by smaller percentages of industrial processes and waste. An interesting statistic is that humanity produces more CO2 than it does of all other materials combined by weight. I thought that was a really interesting statistic. It just shows the scale at which we're emitting CO2. So what we need is a new energy infrastructure. And that's where mass beneficial electrification comes in. So in short, we need to decarbonize the electricity supply, electrify almost everything, and replace our fossil fuel infrastructure with a modern, clean, electricity-based one. And so that's my Bruce Hodge fast and loose definition of mass beneficial electrification. But there is actually a beneficial electrification league, and they have a more precise definition of beneficial electrification, which is that it includes the application of electricity to end uses where doing so satisfies at least one of the following conditions without adversely affecting the others. It saves consumers money over time, it benefits the environment and reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and it improves product quality or consumer quality of life. So beneficial electrification is not just electrifying random things, but it's being smart about replacing existing end uses that use other energy sources. And it fosters a more robust and resilient grid. So what is the big picture? All of this is going to require, in the timescale that we have, a massive transformational approach, i.e. industrial mobilization. And this transformation will save money in the end. It's not a cost. But we do need a production ramp that's akin to the ramp that occurred in World War II to ramp up our response. And this transformation generates jobs in every zip code, and renewables generate a lot more jobs than the fossil fuel industry. And after all, really what we want is warm homes, clean hot water, cool cars, clean air, and clean water. So let's take a look at zero carbon energy. So I mentioned that we need to transition to zero carbon electricity, and that comes through solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and nuclear. And storage will play an extremely important role, and that storage will likely be dominated by batteries. There are other battery types other than lithium ion. Flow batteries are one example, which may be a big solution to the storage issues. And we need to upgrade our electric grid to grid 2.0. The recent news coming out of Texas is an example of how we really need to pay attention to resiliency of our grid. The transition to electrifying everything will require a 3 to 4x our current electricity supply. Fortunately, the new devices we're talking about are ultra efficient. And renewable energy is a technology, so the cost will decline over time. And we do have some positive global trends for decarbonized electricity. The International Energy Agency says that the world's best solar power schemes now offer, quote, the cheapest electricity in history, with the technology cheaper than coal and gas in most major countries. And solar electricity is 20 to 50% cheaper today than the IEA had estimated in last year's outlook, with the range depending on the region. And there are similarly large reductions in the estimated cost of onshore and offshore wind. So once we've got this carbon-free electricity, we need to electrify everything. We need to transition all of our fossil fuel devices to ultra-efficient electric devices. So we really need to rapidly move to no new fossil fuel devices. So the major devices that emit the most or use the most energy are water heaters, HVAC, that's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and vehicles, of course. And we need to replace these existing devices at their end of life. But we need to do that at nearly 100% replacement rates. And this likely requires new performance-based standards, which phase out fossil fuels. And it requires large-scale financing at zero or nominal interest rates. You might think of the FHA, Federal Housing Administration, which essentially set up financing that allowed America to acquire home ownership of homes. We need something similar to that with like a federal climate authority. Fossil fuels are cheap now, and they're cheap now and expensive later, and renewables are expensive now and cheap later. So what are some of the beneficial electrification technologies? So we have heat pumps. Refrigerators use heat pumps. It's a proven technology. They just move heat from one place to another, and they can achieve spectacular efficiencies up to 400% for water heaters and 400 to 500% for HVAC. And that's compared to efficiencies of existing devices that typically range from 60 to 98% efficient. And no, it's not a typo that it's 400% efficient. It's not violating any laws of thermodynamics. It works because it's pulling heat out of the air. It's moving heat around and it's not generating heat through combustion. So these efficiencies slash the operational cost of electric devices by 4 to 5x and make them competitive or even cheaper to operate than fossil fuel devices, depending, of course, on the electric rates and the natural gas rates. We have batteries and EVs, and EVs largely exist because of the advances in battery technology. We now have cars that are easy to obtain that have 50 kilowatt hour batteries that give 200 plus miles of range. The automotive industry is finally putting increasing emphasis on EVs. You probably saw the recent announcement by GM. Ford is announcing a new hot Mustang EV. So finally, some of the car manufacturers are getting on board with this. The total cost of ownership of EVs is less than gassers, mainly because the fueling costs are so low. They also have extremely low maintenance and awesome performance. And there's a ton of battery R&D going on, and so we can only expect further advances in this area. And so this was an interesting quote from Saul Griffith. He's saying that to replace our 250 million personal gasoline-powered devices with EVs in the next 20 years, we'll need over 1 trillion batteries, or around 600. Sorry, this happens when I try to move my little Zoom thing around so I can see my screen. We'll need over 1 trillion batteries, or around 60 billion 18650 batteries every year. So those are batteries that are about the size of a bullet. They're 18 millimeters in diameter and 65 millimeters long. But that's similar to the 90, okay, so 60 million batteries every year, similar to the 90 billion, did I say 60 billion, 90 billion manufactured by the world today. We need a lot of batteries, but it is possible we need batteries, not bullets. So true. So grid 2.0, our power grid needs some updating. The basic design is over 100 years old. We need a smart grid. The power grid needs to excel in showing power across regions so that each region doesn't have to be 100% self-efficient, although distributed generation and local storage are important. This would be helping out quite a bit with Texas right now, if they had something like this with power sharing. Grid interactive devices can be used to supply power to the grid, or to delay the consumption of power. So water heaters can be grid interactive. There's also vehicle to home / building, or V2H and V2B. This enables EVs to power homes and buildings, and it's obviously good for power outages. You know, an EV with a 50 kilowatt hour battery has a lot of power that could last over a multi-day power failure. There's also vehicle to grid, which would enable EVs to contribute power to the grid or to be charged at the times that are best for the current load on the grid. The V2H stuff is happening already in Japan, and the only reason it's not happening here in the United States is because of some regulatory hurdles. I'm hoping we can clear those quickly. The vehicle to grid stuff is also fairly close to being deployed. There's really no technical reasons why it can't be. It does require some utility infrastructure, so it could be as part of Grid 2.0. That will greatly help in terms of managing peak demand on our grid. So what kind of pace of electrification do we need? Well, in short, we need to electrify more rapidly. So these charts from Rewiring America, this is a Saul Griffiths organization, show that we have these futures here on the left. We really want a future that's either this green curve or this cyan curve. They correspond to these different kinds of adoption curves. So you can see that in order to stay in the kind of world that we want, we really need early retirement, then 100% or 100% replacement at end of life, or a production ramp and then 100%. All these things are things that are not happening right now. Over here on the right are things which are not going to move the needle rapidly enough. They include the free market, a low carbon tax, a small market subsidy, or even a high carbon tax. So we really need to focus on this 100% replacement at end of life strategy, because that's the one that's going to get us where we need to be. Menlo Park has done some analysis. These are slides from the Menlo Park Environmental Quality Commission. Their analysis shows that even if you deploy aggressive rebates, you're not going to generate the kind of replacement rates that are needed to electrify the majority of the water heater fleet in the next 10 years. However, if they replace essentially all of the fossil fuel devices at their end of life with BE devices, that it achieves the goal. And you can see that the goal is near near zero by 2030. Over here on the other graph, we're not getting there. And of course, the total amount of tons of CO2 emitted, CO2e, is a dramatic difference. Palo Alto has an 80 by 30 goal, which is an 80% reduction by 2030. And so modeling is showing that Palo Alto can only meet its goal by 100% replacement rate of all devices, and this includes vehicles as well, at or near their end of life. And this means that in Palo Alto, we need to replace roughly 2,300 water heaters per year, 1,400 HVAC units per year. This is furnaces, air conditioning systems, and thousands of cars per year. And so this graph shows sort of the steep kinds of reductions that are required in order to hit this this goal. We need a production ramp up across not only our country, but the entire world. We need to ramp up the production capacities of EVs by 4x, batteries by 16x, wind turbines by 12 times, solar modules by 10x. Who knows how many heat pump water heaters we need? A lot. And the same with heat pump HVAC. We need lots of these devices, and we need the production ramped up significantly. And so let's take a look at how public policy can affect some of these, this deployment. So rebates and incentives alone are not going to enable mass electrification. So rebates are financed by utility ratepayers, and they don't really scale beyond early adopters. And even large rebates don't help low and moderate income residents without the additional capital needed to participate. And rebates alone don't reduce the complexities of electrifying for building owners. And rebates are also an absolute cost with no recovery. And so it's difficult, if not impossible, to apply to all customers across a 10 to 20 year period. So if you just look at the Bay Area alone, $400 million per year in rebates alone, for water heaters alone, would be spent if you assume a $2,000 rebate per water heater. So this is a typical rebate that's being handed out right now for water heaters. It's a lot of money going out the door that's not being recovered. So effective policy approaches are going to have to include moving towards mandates or performance standards that effectively prohibit new fossil fuel devices. This idea of 100% replacement at the end of life is a logical extension of the energy reach codes that we have been adopting here in the Bay Area, and it's also a common sense approach. No more devices that burn fossil fuels. And we need to focus on a market transformation to upgrade our energy infrastructure. And we should encourage this zero interest financing of all fossil fuel devices, and it should also address the racial and economic injustice issues. And we should encourage the proactive replacement of fossil fuel devices in buildings by utilities. We should also encourage working from home and a commensurate reduction in commuter traffic. And we should phase out fossil fuel vehicles. How we're going to do that, it's unclear. We really need everyone to not buy a gas car. How do you make that happen? So I wanted to touch briefly on one approach to mass electrification. It's Be Smart. This is something that Carbon Free Palo Alto developed. Utilities are proactively orchestrate the replacement of soon-to-fail fossil fuel devices with BE devices. And the replacement process is designed to be quick and easy for the customer. And the customers pay an initial outlay that's equal to the normal business as usual cost of replacing the device with another fossil fuel device. And so, for instance, if it was going to cost them $1,000 to replace their gas water heater with another gas water heater, they would still pay $1,000. And then, say, like the new device costs $2,000, then that difference of $1,000 would be financed at low interest rates, ideally less than 2% or even zero, even better. And this would happen for all customers. There'd be no credit checks. Everybody would qualify as a utility customer. That's a whirlwind tour of Be Smart. We are starting to get some interest in it from a number of utilities. So stay tuned on that. At the national policy level, there's this huge opportunity for Biden to change the climate policy. And he will likely pursue two major directions. First is national standards via an executive order to regulate CO2 and methane emissions. And he does have the authority to enact these standards via executive orders under the Clean Air Act. And fortunately, in 2007, the Supreme Court ruled that the Clean Air Act does apply to carbon emissions. And the other major direction would be subsidies to make clean energy cheap. We do actually give out a lot of subsidies to the fossil fuel industry today. I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot. And that money shouldn't be going to them, should be used for making clean energy cheap. So we have a lot of action going on here in the Bay Area. We're leading the charge. So this is sort of a quick timeline of what's happened here in the Bay Area. So starting in 2010, we have seen a rise of CCA's community choice aggregation, which is a fancy way of saying it's a utility that is interested in, at least here in the Bay Area, in sourcing clean energy. So Marin Clean Energy was the first, followed by Sonoma Clean Power. In 2016, Palo Alto became one of the first carbon neutral electric utilities. In 2016, we saw San Francisco and roll out Clean Power SF. There's Silicon Valley Clean Energy that spun up, and Peninsula Clean Energy. Just rapid progress in 2016 and 2018, East Bay Community Energy. 2019, San Jose Clean Energy. And also the Berkeley gas ban in 2019, which used municipal police powers to ban the use of gas in new buildings. And then from 2019 to the present, we've had municipal energy reach codes adopted from San Francisco to San Jose, and Diane Bailey of Midland Spark has organized the fossil-free buildings campaign of Silicon Valley to provide this crucial momentum. Terra has joined that effort. It's been a clean sweep. I believe there's more than 25 different cities that have adopted reach codes, one kind or another. And so kudos to Diane and her campaign. It's been huge. 2021, I think we're going to be really increasingly focusing on performance standards and mandates. So what can you do? You can take personal responsibility. You can focus on your big, long-lasting purchases and develop a plan to ditch fossil fuel from your life. You should replace your natural gas water heater at the end of life or sooner with a heat pump water heater. You should replace your HVAC at end of life with a heat pump HVAC. You should replace your fossil fuel at end of life with an EV. Do you see a trend here? And you can reduce your consumption. You can buy, drive, and fly less. Those will all reduce your footprint. It's also the food that you eat, which is important. And you can also crucially plug into the political process and demand local action. It's scary for a lot of people, but it's actually amazingly easy to influence your local political leaders. And it doesn't really take that many people for them to stand up, many people saying the same thing for them to pay attention. So this is probably one of the largest leverage actions you can take, is to get involved with what's going on. And stay connected with Terra, because they will be giving you a feed of what's going on. I've got some acronym soup over here. I think you've probably all figured this all out. So Saul Griffith has a call to action, and this is his quote: "We now face a climate emergency as challenging as all of our other 20th century emergencies combined. It requires mobilization with extraordinary speed and resources. Without doubt, you are worried, scared, or worse. That's reasonable, but we can't do nothing. And as we'll find out, this is also a vast opportunity to improve our world." And so to that, I add, let's roll. And so with that, I'd like to thank you and open it up to questions. If you're interested in taking a deeper dive, you can check out this Rewiring America Field Manual by Saul Griffith. If you search for this on the web, you can download a PDF of this for a nominal fee. It's a great book, and it's really helped inspire some of this talk. So thank you, Saul.
Great, thank you so much, Bruce, for the presentation. We got some great questions that came in, so I'm going to start reading them off to you, and we'll try to get to as many as we can with the limited time that we have. So the first one is by Ron, and Ron wants to know, how do you see the equity issue regarding reductions? Should most reductions come from advanced economies? Would that be adequate?
Well, equity is clearly very important, and we need to make sure that in this transformation that equity occurs. And I think there are mechanisms that allow us to do that. It's clearly something where it has to happen across the board.
Okay, great. Let's see the next one. I heard on NPR the other day that gas companies are looking at promoting the existing gas infrastructure grid to transition to methane from food waste and then hydrogen. There's a company starting to develop ovens that will run on natural gas. What is the implication of this type of energy? Is this all just another example of greenwashing?
Pretty much. So there's no way, there's just simply not enough biomass to make the amount of methane needed. And methane is just a nasty chemical anyway, because it's a greenhouse gas in its own right, and it leaks, and it's explosive. And every day almost there's an item in the news about some explosion that occurred. The biomethane is not the answer. It could be that it could be used in airplanes, perhaps, could play a role there, but it's not something we want to be piping into our homes and businesses for heating of air and space.
Sure, thank you. Okay, the next question is, hello, I just read a news article from Washington Post about the massive power outages in Texas just now. Wondering on the relation of this talk to that. Thanks. You covered this a little bit, but maybe you could dive in a little bit more.
Well, apparently the failures were largely due to the thermal plants failing. So this is the existing plants that are coal-fired or gas-fired that boil water to generate electricity. So apparently the very cold temperatures took a lot of those down. And from what I understand, there were some outages in some of the wind turbines, but they're up and running again. And so this is a wake-up call in terms of making sure that our grid is resilient, reliable, and this idea of having a national grid where we can wheel power around as needed would help a lot.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Maria would like to know, what about shifting current fossil fuel subsidies towards manufacturers to keep the cost of equipment low instead of consumer rebates?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. A lot of the unfortunately, a lot of the expense of electrifying is actually costs other than the device. So sure, it would be great. I think that what's going to happen is if we're able to undergo this transformation, that's going to drive down the cost of these devices through economy of scale. It's unclear, and of course, as we get better and at understanding how to do this transformation at the actual physical level of putting in new circuits and the actual manual labor that needs to be done, we'll figure out how to make that more efficient as well. So,
sure, okay. Debbie Meitel says, because we are now getting so much inexpensive solar energy in California, we should be encouraging people to use electric appliances and charge EVs during the day. And then here's the question. Do you know if PG&E and the City of Palo Alto utilities have changed the time of use rate structure to charge less for energy used during the hours of sunshine?
Palo Alto doesn't have TOU. And PG&E, I think they do have. I'm not a PG&E. I'm pretty sure PG&E has TOU. There's probably other people on the call that could answer that, but I'm pretty sure that they do have a TOU rate structure, and it requires installing, another meter. Well, it requires a meter capable of doing that, which is what Palo Alto is lacking. We don't have the smart meters to make that happen right now.
Okay. Ron would like to know, how about policies to support pedestrian, biking, and transits?
Yeah, all the above.
I had a feeling. And then James asks, the cost of non-fossil fuel appliances could be handled like cell phones. I guess it's more of a comment. The utility provides the appliance, you pay it off over time if the utility shuts down their gas service. Do you have any comments about that?
Financing, I think, is going to play a big role in all this. We're sort of at this point where we really have to take our existing infrastructure, which is this crappy fossil fuel infrastructure, and replace it with this clean energy infrastructure. And it has a cost, a capital cost associated with doing that. But after we've made that down payment, the operational costs are just going to continue to go down, and we'll be able to pay back all of those sunk costs over time. But the key is to not have to pay for all that, upfront. And so we can do this through bonds and through the federal government, and there's a variety of different ways. But there's no question there's a lot of money that it's going to take in order to make this happen, and it really needs to be distributed to all the parties that are going to need it.
Definitely. Do you have time for a few more?
Sure.
Okay. Douglas asks, our gas water heater is in the garage, not near an outside wall. How hard and expensive is it to convert such a situation to a heat pump water heater?
Well, your mileage is going to vary, but I would say that it shouldn't be too hard. Um, you you need to supply it obviously with electricity, so um, you need a circuit,
Mhm.
which you may or may not have. I have a pump water heater in my garage, and I had to install a circuit in order to make that happen. There's also a condensate issue, so since it's a refrigerant setup, it generates condensate, which then is required by code to go into a drain somewhere. You can lay out tubing to make that happen, and then there's a pump that you can use if the length exceeds a certain amount.
Okay. James was hoping that you could comment/compare the distribution of electricity from a central plant versus distributed production at homes.
Um, there are losses associated with taking power, distributing power from central power plants. So distributed infrastructure is definitely more efficient. I don't know all the numbers for that.
Mhm.
Um, the key, probably that's something that we're gonna be moving towards anyway as part of the Grid 2.0. But we don't necessarily need to have everyone install solar on their rooftop, for instance.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay. Sure. Here are the last two that I'm going to ask you. So one is, as a high school schooler who wishes to electrify the home I live in, how would you recommend convincing others, meaning parents and friends, to switch to new, cleaner technologies?
wow. uh, get to know your parents, and what are their barriers that are preventing them from wanting to do that. It's this is really the future of your world. And so
Mhm.
if I were in high school, I would be extremely concerned about this. I mean, I'm extremely concerned about it already, but if you're in high school, you've got a whole future stretching ahead of you, and unless we solve this climate crisis, it's going to be um, a pretty turbulent world to live in. We're starting to see that increasingly.
Mhm.
So play the future card.
Okay. And then the last one is, why is there not more emphasis nationally and locally for everyone to live more lightly to reduce their use of all types of energy for transportation and all the things we consume?
Yeah, I think that's important. The the beneficial electrification really places emphasis upon ultra efficient devices. So
Mhm.
that is causing you to use less energy. And that's really the only way that we can electrify everything. If we had to replace everything with old school devices, it would just require way more energy than we could possibly generate. So we're
Mhm.
really moving to high efficiency um, systems. And of course, living lightly on the planet, like I said, drive less, um, fly less,
Mhm.
buy less. I mean, Bill McKibben at one point was saying that every dollar that you spend is sort of equivalent to consuming a pint of oil or burning a pint of oil. So consumerism does cause damage to the planet. So be mindful for
Yep.
sure.
Yep. Great. Well, Bruce, thank you again so much for being here with us this evening. If you guys did have any questions about time of use and PG&E, some people have supplied some great answers in the Q&A box. I'll also share some resources in the follow-up email after this event. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your night. Take care.
Thank you, and bye bye.